intro and hand it over to you. So, Todd, thank you so much for being with us today. We're super pleased to have you, and thanks for being generous with your insights and time. For those of you TechStars folks on the call, Todd's been a longtime mentor in the TechStars program, leader in the Boulder startup community. He's an engineer by training, but also a repeat successful founder. So I think founder of Rain Dance, which went public.
Yep.
Took a company public. Founder of Legit Networks, which was acquired by Federated Media, and most recently the founder of VictorOps, which was acquired by Splunk. So Todd has a ton of history in your shoes. Yeah, and he's raised a lot of money in his time. So wanted to share some of his insights around running a company, raising money, etc. So happy to hand over the mic to you, Todd. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, Natty. Happy to do this. Just for context, I used to give this presentation to my employees at VictorOps, just kind of as a value add for working there, because I think part of the journey at a startup is to teach other people startups. So this presentation goes over kind of business type, ideation, pitching, and financing. I realize the second half of the presentation is probably more interesting to a lot of people given where you're at in the stage with TechStars, but I'll move through the first part for context because I think it's actually kind of important. Who am I? As Natty said, my name's Todd Vernon. I went to Arapahoe High School in Littleton. They wouldn't let me touch a computer as a kid in high school because my math grades sucked so much. I got a double E from Central Missouri State. However, I spent all my time programming. So what I actually ended up doing for a living had nothing to do with my college career. My first job was at NASA, where I figured out I really sucked at being a double E, but I was actually a pretty good software engineer. I moved back to Colorado, worked at a few software companies, and then ended up founding 3 companies starting in '97, and I still program where I can. So largely this 20+ year arc is where all of this personal advice comes from. I have a ton of opinion and I'm going to give it. But you guys get a lot of good advice from a lot of people. So I encourage you to, to temper what I say with what other people have said that are also super smart. As Natty mentioned at the beginning, I've either directly or helped raise a lot of money over the years, over 220 million, and that doesn't even include the $50 million IPO. So I've raised a lot of money from a lot of people through a lot of companies. And this is, nearest I can tell, this is exactly what I would do if I was going to do it again. So it's the best advice I got. This is important for the presentation. I'm just going to tell you what VictorOps does or did for me. I'm no longer with the company after selling it, but it's kind of important because part of this presentation actually talks about the pitch deck I used to pitch VictorOps to raise money and why I generated it the way I did. So basically, just for context, VictorOps was kind of a mobile app that would alert people to problems. So there's tons of companies that tell you there's a problem with your infrastructure. We would ingest all that information and tell the right person about it. That's essentially what the company did. There are 2 kinds of businesses. When I give this presentation at CU and DU, I feel obligated to kind of put this at the beginning. I won't spend a ton of time on it, but basically there's lifestyle type businesses and velocity type businesses. Lifestyle are all the ones you would expect: restaurants, bike stores, breweries, a lot of passion businesses. I would even put lawyers in that case, law firms, because they scale essentially with people instead of with technology. And then there's velocity businesses. Velocity businesses are not always obvious. They have large market opportunities, generally greater than $1 billion. Billion is kind of almost on the small side sometimes for a velocity business, and 20% compound annual growth rate, I would say, is probably typical of the kind of companies that I'm talking about. The businesses have to move fast by definition. That's kind of what makes them a velocity business. In 10 years, you generally want the company to be worth about 10 times the cash you put into it. That's the expectation of investors. You ultimately will need venture capital in a velocity business, is my position, because if it were a slow business, then you wouldn't need if it's a slow business, that means there's no market opportunity generally. So what you're going to hear from me today is sort of this kind of business in the red box, and all of the references set to that because that's really the only thing I know anything about. And during this presentation, you'll see URLs along, and I've written a lot about these things on Inc. over the years. So in a velocity business, you need basically 3 things. You need a surfboard, you need a surfer, and a wave. I didn't make this analogy up. I got it from the first venture capitalist I met in 1997, describing why somebody would invest in you in a velocity business. And frankly, if you only remember one thing, remember this piece of the presentation and make sure you can map your business against it. Essentially, the surfboard's a great idea. It's your product, it's your service. The surfer represents a great team suited to execute the idea, and the wave is a market wave that propels the company. His position in 1997, which I totally agree with now in 2020, was if you don't have all three of these, you're going to have a tough go at a velocity business. And we'll get into each one of those. The idea, which is essentially the surfboard, focus on a real pain point, not a nice to have product or service. I can't say that enough times. I've said it 3 times on the slide, but it's kind of a 10-time thing. It's like seriously, don't mess this one up. Your thing has to either save time, save money, or have some new capability. Talk to everyone about your idea that you can. No one's going to steal it. It doesn't happen in practice. If it's such a simple idea that someone can just steal it in a weekend, then it probably wasn't that great an idea anyway. If you have problems coming up with an idea because you're just fresh out of college or whatever, look more closely. If you're still having problems, put yourself in situations to find them. That just means your world isn't large enough. Most people who are super young bring me a business idea is some sort of weed distribution thing. It's because they're only solving the problem that is immediately in front of them. It's kind of a little joke I have. The team. So this represents the surfer on the surfboard. Founders are super important. It's very difficult to start any business by yourself. You need good founders. Make sure they have complementary skill sets. And I like to say, founding teams are like getting married. When you get married, everybody comes out of the woodwork and starts acting nuts, and so do your founders. So, pick them wisely, make sure that you can stay in the trench with them because you're going to be there a really long time. And my average is 7 years. Every company I've ever done has been about 7 years. So, pick them wisely. The team to me, it's one of the best reasons, and it's also one of the reasons investors won't invest you in the future if the team doesn't make sense. You can kind of get by sometimes if you need to augment the team, but if it's a little unlogical, that can be a real hindrance in financing your company. Pick them carefully, reward them well. Your early team members, not your founders. They're taking a chance on you, so they deserve a reasonable equity grant to deal with the high risk of the situation. And personally, I bias towards senior people. I'd rather have less people but that were smart than more people that are kind of trying to all figure it out together. But I think that's a personal opinion thing. Another Inc. article mentioned there down below. Market way is probably the most important thing, and probably the thing I see missing from most presentations that ultimately get sent to me. I do some angel investing, and this is almost always the missing piece. A great market can save an imperfect product or even an imperfect team or the loss of a founder. If you have a market wave, you're doing yourself a big favor. And I like to compare the two. People, like smartphone adoption, everybody owns a smartphone, and it kind of happened in a 10-year period. Like, you can't go wrong with a market like that. Now, obviously, that wave is kind of past. Now everybody has a phone, but my point is that was a really good wave to get on early if you recognize it and do something with. By contrast, electric car adoption, yeah, they're super cool, but it's going to take the rest of our natural life for electric cars to kind of be a thing. The last time I looked at net market penetration, it's going to be less than 10% in 10 years. Maybe it's slightly ahead of that. I sort of doubt it. A good example is VictorOps, my last company. Every investor I talked to was looking to invest in DevOps, which is the space or the market wave that we rode. They weren't looking necessarily to invest in VictorOps. They just wanted something in the space because investors look at market waves. So, 90% of the investors were looking for something to do in the space. And boy, that helps if you're raising money because they're already looking for something to invest in. And market wave is super important. And the last bit of this where it's like, why does Airbnb, why does Slack, why are the interesting businesses now? This slide couldn't be more true. It's like, I'm sure Uber is having a hard time with, because their market wave sort of at least, stopped for a little bit, where Slack is probably exploding along with Zoom because of a market wave, a rogue wave that came around that nobody even knew about. So market is super important. We'll probably talk about that here more in a minute. I always tell people to avoid being a cliche too. And boy, I see this all the time. It's like, because I'm kind of this weird crossover of a nerd and a business person. First time, the cliche here, and like, it's just a cliche, but it happens all the time. First time founders who come from engineering, they almost always build a solution looking for a problem. They get enamored with some kind of technology, and they build something, but they're not, and to them it's cool, so it's a cool product because it does something. I just looked at an angel deal the other day where I ultimately passed because it was just a cool piece of technology. And I couldn't figure, I think somebody's going to buy it for something, but the company didn't know why. This is a real case with engineering founders. First time founders who come from sales are kind of the opposite. They listen to the customer a lot, but they also have a tendency to discount how hard sometimes it is to build the technology. And they're subject to, what I call creative financing schemes because they're sort of business people and they live a little outside of the box. But they also, outsource key pieces like engineering and incur radical tech debt. So, these are two like major cliches that I see every day. But founders, regardless of where they come from, I think the biggest problems I see are failure to target a real pain point for the customer, failure to pick a market that has a healthy market wave, like a real wave, not one you've made up, like something is really happening right now. And so you have to open the aperture to see that sometimes, but it needs to be part of your story, I think, to successfully raise for a velocity business. And, and failure to adequately test the viability of the concept. I think people in the TechStars program are less vulnerable to this, but in general, you see it all the time. You talk to 3 people, the founder will talk to 3 people and get really excited about it. And you're like, well, maybe you should talk to like 25 people. This is sort of important to me. This one took a long time for me to grok personally. I call it top down versus bottom up storytelling. And I use Crocs as an example of 2 ways to tell the same story. Top down approach, market first, is what I call it. We're a global rubber shoe manufacturer that leverages the world economy and top designers to build rubber shoes. As each human, big and small, buy multiple pairs of Crocs, we'll establish this channel and sell silly gibbets into it for every man and woman for their rubber shoes. To me, that's a top-down approach. It's like you're trying to lean in with, oh my God, this market is so huge, almost to the detriment of you don't even care why I'm here talking to you and what the product is. So that's kind of thing one. The bottom-up approach, which I call pain first, we're people that understand standing all day. We design and market a line of rubber shoes that are comfortable and fun to wear. As we grow, we'll provide attractive products that will sell into our established brand, and everybody will own 10 pair of Crocs. That is, in my opinion, the only way to pitch an early stage company. You have to start with the pain. And I see so many people, and they're often finance people, that try to pitch the market first approach because they're really excited about the market opportunity. But a typical angel investor or early stage investor knows, yes, of course we need a giant market, but if you don't solve somebody's problem initially right away, you're never going to get the opportunity to leverage that market. So don't even talk to me like that, is my personal opinion. Again, there's another piece I've written on this subject. So my advice is pain first. New business models are always kind of interesting. The one I pick on here is marketplace businesses. They seem so logical because you have a buyer and a seller, and you're sort of the market being made in the middle. I would say, be careful of those. They're excellent businesses if you can get them going, but it's actually like building 2 businesses simultaneously. And it's hard enough to do one. And the problem is you need a lot of supply before the demand kicks in. I would caution people to do that, having done it myself. My second company was that. It was actually very difficult to do, but they are interesting businesses. But, it's kind of, it shows there are interesting businesses out there that you can build that are typically not, that are far from brick and mortar businesses. You can never really do this, you know, in a traditional world, and they are interesting, but don't get too enamored with them. A great case study that I like to, that, you know, it's my case study because I watched this happen in 2003-ish idea, was the idea of this company called Root Markets in New York. And you'll notice about this, it's a top-down pitch, is if you have all the surfing data from a ton of people out there, wouldn't that be really interesting? Because you could see how they go from place to place, and what brands are influencing other brands and how people are moving. And of course, that's interesting. The failure of it is you had to get all these people to instrument their browser and send browsing data into the cloud, into the business at the time. And then they would mine that for information. They'd pay you about 20 cents a day to do that. Well, that's dumb, because first of all, 20 cents a day isn't enough motivation for anybody, you know, to do this. But it was such a top-down idea because, oh yeah, it would be super valuable if you had all this data. The fact is you can't really get it. It's really hard to do it. But, you know, on the surface, it kind of looked logical because you're willing to have a credit card, and because they're trading you immense value of not having to carry cash around and being able to float money in exchange for personal information. They know everything about you. So these things can appear really logical, but you have to be really careful and think to yourself what the motivations of the person are, and are they really solving a real problem? So let's get on to building the deck, because this is, I think, where it starts to get a little more interesting for some of you that have been in the program a little longer. You know, this is my advice. This is the way I build it. And what I'm going to do after this slide is take you through the VictorOps deck that follows this exact strategy, and you can be the judge of whether you think it works or not. So slide one, you know, what's your pain you're solving for? You only get one slide. It's kind of like a resume sometimes. It's like, if it doesn't resonate with you, you know, the problem domain doesn't register with you, you know, you're probably not going to go on to the next place. And then, you know, a fast follow on that is, why does the problem need to be solved right now? It goes to the market wave. You know, right now is the operative word in this. Why can't I solve it in 2 years? You know, why hasn't it been solved before? Detail the problem so someone of moderate intelligence can understand it. I see tons of decks where I'm like, I don't even know what the product was at the end of this deck. It's like unbelievable. How does your solution solve this problem? Very specifically, you're locking in the problem, you're locking in that your solution is, you have something that's going to solve that problem. It's so important. If this is so important, why hasn't this been done before? To me, it has to be in the first 5 slides, because especially if the product's really good, you go, well, why hasn't somebody else done this if it's such a, you know, an awesome thing? And then what does your product actually do? I look at decks all the time where I can't figure out what the product is at the end of it. You know, maybe they do a really good job explaining the problem, but then they haven't made the connection of exactly how their product does that. And then I think you got some slop in there where you can talk about key differentiators, because that's the next thing that's going to come up is, okay, you've convinced me you have a problem. You've convinced me you have some sort of solution to it. You've convinced me it's timely, but how are you different than the competition? It kind of goes to, why hasn't this been done before? And then you're kind of, to me, when you get to that point, you're sort of in the home stretch with only one really important thing to answer, and that's why you. Why is your team the ones to solve this? What's special about you guys? You know, are you picking something that's completely out of your domain, or is something that's in your domain? Either one can work, but you have to be able to answer the question of why it's you. And, you know, then broad brush the business bits at the end of it, you know, because you're not trying to sell them in one presentation. You're trying to get them to ask more questions. You know, you're going to talk to anybody 10 times before you're going to get any investment from them. So let's put this to practical use here. This is actually, you know, I changed the logo on it, but this was actually the deck from 2012 that got the investment in VictorOps. So I'll, you know, comment on it. Slide one, what's the pain you're solving for? So, you know, for us, it was, you know, so this really went to market, but, you know, over the last 20 years, businesses are 24-hour business cycles. It's a global economy. Customers have enormous expectations, and it's really hard to build architectures that do that all the time. Things break. Why does the problem need to be solved right now was the point of this slide. Because it's a great big job, and it's these systems need constant remediation. This is a new thing. There's a new group, there's a new market wave called DevOps people who are responsible for this new behavioral pattern where your system has to be up 24 hours a day, all the time, forever. You can never turn it off once you turn it on. In a typical 1 week period, these people get hundreds of automated alerts. That sounds like a lot of pain. If you're getting up in the middle of the night and you get 100 of these things a week, that sounds painful. And you have to escalate this to other team members. Slide 3. I don't know. Okay, explain this problem to me. This is a new world. I never get up with my phone going off. So I gave a quick example. On-call engineer gets up along with an app engineer. They look at these logs and traces for 2 hours, and they think they're not exactly sure what it is they think it is. But then they get the right person involved, and it's instant. It's basically instantly solved. Meaning, timely diagnosis is based on having a lot of eyes. So basically I'm setting that, this stage for this is a collaboration problem. You have to have more eyes on the problem. And then why? Because collaboration expedites remediation. You solve problems faster if you get more eyes on the problem. You need to tell people about this situation. Why hasn't this ever been done before? You said it's a 20-year-old problem. Why hasn't anybody solved this? It's because of essentially the shift in mobile technologies. Before to solve the problem, you need collaboration. And previously, to have forever, to get collaboration, you need communication, information, context, and participation. You didn't have 2 of the 4 things. If you were remote, you didn't have information that was usable to you, and you couldn't really participate because you couldn't see that information. Versus now, with smartphones and iPhones and Android devices, you have the full chain. So the point I'm making is the problem is old, the solution is new, and there's a giant pent-up market that was ready to be tapped that just couldn't be unlocked until mobile devices was around. So then I said to Clement, I didn't actually use this concept very long in the company about a vertical collaboration platform, but that's essentially what it is. Then I kind of broad brush, okay, what's your differentiators from the competitor? And measured response was the original name. But you get all of this information on your phone so you can participate, so you can be part of the problem solving. And then I go through, this is kind of the slides where you get to talk about some scenarios that can cement in why somebody would use the product. Yes, somebody's at home. Are they reachable? You can route stuff to them. Transcription and remediation, resolution and documentation, and then the business bits at the end. And I see a lot of people get hung up on this, but to me, it's like, because I had this problem too. It's like, okay, how can I represent the customer dynamics? So for me, it was like, I just took this simple equation and called every CEO that I could possibly get my hands on that was in a SaaS business and said, hey, do you believe you kind of lose 1% of your yearly revenue to service interruptions? And they go, yeah, I buy that. There's no data other than a whole bunch of CEOs that would say that. And I said, okay, great. Well, 1% is this kind of money. And I think I can sell this thing for $60 a seat. I think at the end of the day, it turned out to be $30 a seat, but largely the math held, and I pitched it as it's basically a insurance play, right? Your people are having to do this stuff anyway. It's unavoidable. You're never going to have a situation where things don't break. So what can you do to make that break cost you less? So that was sort of the bottom line. And then, here's the team or the dude riding the surfboard, obviously people that should be able to solve this problem, and they've been solving the problem in their own businesses for, at this point, 15 years or whatever. And then the business bits. Okay, great. What is it? It's a SaaS business. We sell into the VP of operations. We target, operations group, medium-sized companies. We'll start small, go big. We'll expand it into a knock product. And there's the possibility of expanding to other markets or mobilizing people, remediate problems. I wouldn't put that last bullet on anymore. And we can talk about it, in questions or whatever. But the point is, you don't need to go into a ton more information than this. If you can answer these questions and you can be asked about them and answer logically, that's pretty good for a seed stage company, in my personal opinion. So great, we've been all through that. What's the cookbook for success in this pitching thing? I suggest you do not deviate from this plan. Thing one, and keep doing this until you have both. Either identify a product that addresses a real pain point, then map it to a wave, or identify a wave and then find a product that fixes a real pain point in that wave. If you don't have the wave and you don't have the product, I wouldn't go past thing one personally. It's just like, I think you're going to have a lot of problems, you know? So thing two then becomes much more actionable if you have those two things. Go pitch as many target people as you can. I mean, literally find everyone you can and pitch them. But you're not really, I would say, you know, there has to be a solution element to your pitch, but your pitch is really, you're trying to validate the market with. You're trying to say, is this a problem? Is this thing I'm telling you is a problem out there? Is it actually a problem? Do you agree that this is a problem? And don't even go on to your solution until you get them to validate your problem. And if they don't validate your problem, you can look at it and go, well, maybe they don't have the problem, so they're not in my target. But you got to find a lot of people who are in your target, because if you don't, then you haven't validated the problem. You shouldn't be doing any of this stuff anyway. And you don't move beyond thing two until you get at least a lot of validation for the problem. And then you want some percentage of those people to believe in your solution, I think. This is what I did with this company. So, fantastic. We've got a great idea. I'm the person to do it. I'm surfing that wave, baby, but I have no money. Sad face. Now what do? We don't have any money. Okay. What the funding market will expect. Natty's probably better at this now than I am, but this is my personal opinion. Your ability to raise money will be highly dependent on you. No one is going to finance something you're not excited about. You got to be excited about it. Like, you are absolutely sure this is the thing. Most investors ultimately invest in people, and they don't invest because of the people. I've found a lot of times. I know venture firms that are 100% people first. It could be, you could roll out the Prince spin straw into gold machine, and they're like, I don't know, I don't like the guy who made it. So, you know, you have to be careful. You can't be arrogant, or you'll have a really hard time. You know, some people are attracted to kind of the arrogant thing. I don't think most of them are. If you lie or do anything unethical, you're banished from this club forever. I have a friend that is banished from this club forever because he just bent the truth about stuff a lot. Unless you've been doing this for 20 years, you'll need at least a prototype or a complete MVP of the product. This is just one of those things that I just think becomes more immersive and, you know, more required as time goes on. That loosens up a little if you've had successful companies before, but you're probably going to need that. More than likely, you'll need a few customers. In my opinion, they can be homeboys if you can demonstrate that they're somewhat, you know, arm's length away. I would say they can even be people that have promised they'll absolutely buy this thing when it's done and why they will buy it. They can't just say they will buy it. An endorsement from a known entrepreneur can help a lot, as I think most people probably know. How much money will I need? This is a kind of a highly variable opinion. This is my personal opinion. A couple founders paying themselves is about zero. 4 market rate developers, market rate is the key. A product person, tech support, it's about $700K a year. That doesn't include an office, insurance, desk, blah, 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 nothing. Bottom line, convince people to work for free or you're gonna need some money, like without a doubt. Got it, I need money. So what are we gonna do now? Where's the cash store? So there's 2 basic ways to, you know, to raise money here, to get money to start your thing. There's debt financing and equity financing. We're gonna talk a lot about those things. But I'm always amazed how people don't, I know my mother still doesn't understand this, so I felt compelled to make a slide about it. You know, debt, you pay it back, regardless of the outcome generally. Equity financing, they buy a part of your company at a point in time, and it's valued based on that. So there, you know those things. But let's get into more specifics. What are all the conceivable ways to finance your business that I could think of? Maybe there's one missing. And we'll see, but you know, you can self-fund it, and we're going to get into these a little bit, but self-fund, you know, debt financing, which we talked about, cash flow the business through consulting. I've known several situations where this has been tried and sometimes accomplished. Crowdsource, I don't know much about that, but we'll talk about it. Friends and family, angel investors, and venture capital. A couple of these are the more likely ones, so we'll get onto it here pretty quickly. Self-fund is great, especially if you what I call have an unencumbered lifestyle. So typically the younger you are, as you get out of college, you have, you don't have anything, you don't have any money, so you don't have anything to lose. So, take less money and, go for your dream. This is much easier than somebody that's been in the business world 20 years, has a spouse, 2 kids and a dog and a mortgage. It becomes very hard to self-fund. The nice part is obviously you retain all the ownership, but um, it's also kind of difficult to do that. Debt financing, as we said, you have to pay it back. It's nearly impossible to obtain debt unless you have something to leverage against it, like a house, and that'll separate the doers from the non-doers for sure. If you're taking out a second mortgage to do your thing, there's convertible debt from angel investors, but they typically don't think of it as debt. They think of it as an investment at a valuation yet to be determined. So I don't really consider it debt personally. And then, this is, to be honest, it's generally not a viable method of financing. I don't think I've known anybody that's really used any significant amount of debt to start a business, maybe, to get a team going, but then to fast follow with angel financing. Cash flow the business through consulting. This one seems like a really good idea. There was a huge company that competed with us at Raindance that did it. It was a consulting company that ultimately ended up starting WebEx. And the idea is you peel cash off from your operating business to pay for 2 developers in the corner who do product development on some special project. In practice, it doesn't usually work because you have a customer, you have a product or a service you're having to support all the time anyway, and that always wins. The person who's paying you money always wins. So those developers get pulled away, they end up supporting that product, and I find that it just generally doesn't work because, again, it's kind of the 2 business model. You're trying to run 2 different businesses. And then what generally happens is you sort of get in this position where I got to raise money now. And then you try to use the business metrics from your less interesting business to finance your interesting business, and investors see right through that. So it's a tough thing to do. It's not impossible. Like I said, a really huge company did it. Crowdsource. I don't know that much about this. The one thing I do know for sure is I think it generally only works in B2C companies. So because the crowd is usually a C, they're consumers that want some specific things. So if you're selling direct to consumers, probably something to consider. And I would ask you to seek other guidance on it because I don't completely understand how to do these. I'm mostly a B2B person. So friends and family, this is actually a pretty common, to me, I think it's probably the most common way to initially get something off the ground. We're going to go into this one in more detail. Angel investors are probably the second most common way to do it. There's sort of a plus to angel investors to me than family members because angel investors are a little more professional. You're not having to go through the emotions of mom's money or your sister's something or other, or, you can remove the emotion a little bit. And, if it fails, you might have a pissed off friend, but you don't have a pissed off family member. So you have to be careful with both of these, and we'll talk about more of it. And then, of course, venture capital, but you got to know what you're in, getting in there. You got to have a pretty good idea. You definitely have to mark a wave, high expectation of return, 7 to 10x on the investment. I think would be a good thing to consider. You will own a minority of the company at some point. And sometimes that's single digit. So you got to get your mind around that. Each investor will generally want a board seat sooner or later. Any velocity business will sooner or later seek venture capital. Because if they don't, that means they weren't really a velocity business in my mind. I don't think you can create a cash machine that generates money fast enough in a velocity business that you don't need outside financing. Maybe you can. There might be examples of that, but probably not. So let's get into angel investor profiles, because a lot of times this is your best source of larger sums of cash. And I break this down into 5 different kinds, and the URL at the top talks about this. I wrote a whole post on it a long time ago. And they're basically the five kinds are family investor, relationship investor, the idea investor, the once removed investor, and what I call the archangel investor. If I don't know anybody who's invested in any startup that doesn't fall into one of these categories. It'd be interesting, if somebody does, but I haven't. The family investor, they're investing in you. Like they probably have no idea. My mom doesn't know what any three of my companies ever did. She has no idea about it. She put money into one of them. Unfortunately, it was the one that returned almost nothing. So this is what you got to kind of get your head around. With the bottom line is you have to decide for them. They're investing in you. They don't know your idea. You have to ask yourself, can they really afford this investment? I could lose their money. If they lose their money, is this something I can deal with and something they can deal with and our family dynamic can deal with it? Bottom line is don't leave it to them. They probably love you. That's probably why they're doing it. So you have to decide for them. The relationship investor, a good example of this is people you've worked with before. So they know you. They're like a family member. They're investing in you, but and they might not know what your idea is at all, but they trust you. They worked with you side by side. Like my second company, the one that didn't return that much money, I had like 10 relationship investors in, and all their money's gone. They'll never see a dollar. Maybe they'll see 10 cents on the dollar someday when Sovereign sells, but that's just the reality of the deal. And, there's some degree of you should be citing for them as well, but it's also a little more arm's length. What I do with relationship investors is tell them, hey, you might lose all this. When I make these kind of investments, in a friend, because I invested all my old co-founders from different companies, I just write the check and say, it's probably gone. That's just the best thing you can do. But they're a real class of investor because they recognize you as a professional, or they like the way you roll, or whatever the situation is. Just make sure that you're not going to blow the situation up when you lose their money. I didn't lose any of those people as friends. They're still good friends, and they would have invested in the third company, but I didn't let them because I didn't want to run that route again. So I decided for them. The idea investor is people you'll kind of see probably through TechStars demo day, I think. And they are typically, like a lot of times they'll be angels, but they love the idea. They don't know you, but they sort of know the market, which is, hopefully they know the market. That's why they're investing. So, these can be excellent people if you get to know them, because they can be good early board members. Make sure they really know the space, because if they don't know the space and they don't know you, why are they making the investment? You should seriously consider not taking the money, in my personal opinion. If they aren't a relationship or an idea investor and they're an individual, you got to ask, why is this happening? And I have a special classification here that I have a slide for, which is make sure they're not a dumb rich guy. And I say this because they're almost always guys. There aren't dumb rich women. I think they're just fundamentally smarter. I don't know. That's my personal opinion. We'll talk about that in a minute. The once removed investor is super important to building out your angel syndicate, because they don't know you or the idea, but they know a idea or relationship investor. And their validation of the idea or the person or the investment is coming once removed through one of those two other people. And this is how you fill it out. You get a handful of people that are in these other two categories, and then they know somebody that trusts them, or they might know the space, so they know other people that know the space, and they can kind of help you sell into this thing. And they're actually great because in some ways the idea or the relationship investor is the linkage to them and can help settle them down, right? You don't have to do hand-to-hand management with each of those people. You can let the network effect sort of do it. These are very important people to get around the table. And then finally, there's sort of this, I call it the archangel investor. They're kind of, they're either, they can be a once removed an idea or a relationship investor, but they're really well connected, and they're the rich, smart woman. Let's call it that. They might have made money for other people before, and they have a cadre of people that sort of follow them. And if you can get one of them involved, you can fill out a round in like 10 minutes. I mean, they're hard to get to, but I would concentrate on the relationship and and the and the idea investor. Like a great example I use is, if I was starting a company to make gym equipment, I would go find somebody who started a company to make gym equipment in the past, and he was super successful. He'll be a great idea investor, a good board member, and he'll probably drag along 10 other people that have money. So that's just sort of my personal opinion. Just a quick sideline on the dumb rich guy problem. I've surprisingly seen this like 20 times in 20 years. In the more desperate you are to find money, you run into these people. And basically the dialogue is, this is a rich person. I've made a ton of money in whatever, but a lot of times it's real estate. And I'm looking, I'm super smart that I made all this money. And I want a way to make more money that leverages not just me, but I know everything about everything. I want some of that IoT, the internet, so I want it all. And don't you worry about finding other money, because I'm going to put $1 million into this thing and you won't need another investor ever. So I'm going to put together super sketchy terms. I won't document anything, right? And then someday the whole thing's going to go to shit because you have a velocity business. He doesn't know what a velocity business is. He thinks, okay, I'll put $1 million in, and then maybe I'll put another $1 million in down the road. He doesn't know he's going to put $1 million in, then you need 10 million down the road. And when you show up with that metric, he's going to freak out, block all future investments, and burn the whole thing to the ground, in my opinion. Stay away from these. They're deadly. They don't follow the profile on the other slide. Beware. They are not any of your angel profiles. I already went through this. This is the misalignment of why these things fail. There's just countless reasons. They always fail, always fail, always fail. So what are you going to need to know to raise money? Part of it is articulating what the heck you're going to do with that money. Sometimes you become so fixated on getting the money, somebody will ask you, well, what's your use of proceeds? What are you going to do with that? And go, I don't know, pay for stuff. So you need a pretty realistic plan about this, but more importantly, you need to be able to communicate what you're going to get done with that money. And you have to be reasonably sure of this. Like don't make up stuff here. It puts you in that category of the person who didn't quite tell the truth. So you need to be pretty sure the money will last as long as you need it to, and you got to be pretty sure you'll get done what you said you were going to do with that money. It can be a little squishy. There can be coronaviruses, and there can be all kinds of things that get thrown at you that you have to deal with. But the point of it is you have to be super upfront with investors on this. They're writing a check, man. You've got to tell them how this whole thing's going to play out in the best of your ideas. I can't take credit for this analogy. This was my co-founder at Rain Dance. I thought it was actually pretty good, but you're like a bus driver, and you got to treat your investors like passengers. Treat your investors as partners, because they are. If you ever talk to a friend who has a company and they talked about their investors as evil people, that I guarantee is a fail waiting to happen. It's not going to work. You're bringing the knowledge and skill. They bring the cash. Respect that. If you don't need their cash, then don't take their cash. But if you do, they're your partners. If you can do it without them, don't take it. And at the end of the day, and this is the part that I borrowed from Paul Barbarian, is he said, being a founder of a startup, your whole company is like one day in the part of it, a bus driver. You get up in the middle of the night, you go out in the snow, you start the bus, you warm it up, you go pick up your investors, which are the kids. Someday you get to turn the bus off, you let the investors off, they get their money, and then you shut the bus down and get your money. If you don't like the way that sounds, then you're in the wrong business, because that's the way it works. You don't get yours before they get theirs. You got to do it that way. So how does an equity investment work? A lot of people have zero idea how this kind of thing works. And this is the best way I could use to describe it is, when you go to get an investment, you and the investor negotiate a pre-money valuation. And it literally kind of comes out of your butt, is the reality of it. In practice, they're kind of 500 to 5 million. And it depends on all the what the company is worth before the money goes in, is what pre-money valuation means. And it's largely based on experience, the alignment of the team. Are they really the people to solve the problem, or do you just sort of believe they can solve the problem? And the product and the size of the wave, if there's a big wave, like these things all go into that pre-money negotiation, but they're almost always between 500 and 5 million. I mean, the number of pre-monies that come outside of that range, I think they're either, if it's lower than 500, a lot of times it's zero. So the investor buys a percentage of the company, based on the pre-money plus invested amount. After all the dust settles on that, that's sort of the post money. So in an example, pre-money was agreed upon at 1.4 million, investment of 700K. The company now has a post of 2.1, investors bought 33%. That's how the math works there. Key investment terms, you will need to know these. So you don't need to completely understand all these things, but you better have read it once, is my personal opinion. And the more professional the investor, in my opinion, the less you need to completely understand these things. If you get off into sketchy land with some angel that's never done anything before, or the dumb rich guy, you're going to need to know all these things, because you're going to end up with weird stuff in there. So luckily, I'm not going to talk about any of these, but I am going to tell you that you should read Venture Deals. It's literally the only business book I've ever read in my life. I hate business books. I hate them with a passion. However, if you're starting a company, you got to buy this thing. It's great because it's all practical, and it's really great because it tells you what you do need to know and what isn't negotiable. Because with any reasonable investor, there's just tons of stuff in here that really aren't negotiable, especially where you guys are at in your entrepreneurial career. I once told a guy, that was, asking me for help, or he wanted me to hear his pitch. And he goes, I said, you should really read this book. And he goes, I looked at it, man. It was like $38 or something. This was years ago. And he goes, that's just too expensive. And I said, are you kidding me? You're dealing with potentially millions of dollars on the backside, and you're worried about $38 on the front side. I would buy the book if I were you. So that's sort of the thing there. So anyway, I know I kind of ripped through this fast. I wanted to get to the financing part for you guys. I'm very passionate about this. I take phone calls and emails all the time. I'm super happy to help people. I occasionally invest if it meets my specific criteria. But I wish you all the best luck. I can't wait to see demo day and see what all the exciting businesses are. Happy to take any questions from the panel.
Thanks, Todd. Folks, feel free to unmute, ask questions. You can put them in the chat if you want. I have a comment here that love the Venture Deals book. Just sad it was left in Boulder during the Exodus. So Todd, we moved to remote 3 weeks ago, and so now we're all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Venture Deal, like I have other venture books that people have given me, and I haven't even read them. They're just so dry. That's the problem I have with business books in general. But I encourage people to read business books. I'm just an experiential learner. I don't think I'm saying that word right. Experience. I have to experience it. Otherwise it's not real to me.
I think you're going for experiential.
Yes, that's correct.
Todd, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you give us all some advice around how to build your investor pipeline? Like, how did you think about what investors to put in there, which ones to talk to first? Like maybe give us some guidance, because that's one of the things that companies are going to start working on, is building a pipeline of investors.
Right. If they're angel type investors or individuals, or maybe part of an angel syndicate or something, I try to find people that know the space, because it's such a hard thing to get people, if by definition you don't know them, so they're not a relationship investor, so you've failed on that. So really the only kind you're going to go find, in my mind, in the angel community are ones that know the space. So target those people and you And typically what I tell people to do is go ask their advice, because anybody that's successful that's going to have the money and want to do this, they're more than happy to give you advice. You're not going in there to ask for money. You're trying to get them to validate that there's a problem, first of all. Second of all, if you can get them get them excited about your solution, that's a win. And third, if they have the money they could probably put in, then you've checked the box. You've probably successfully checked it on the idea, and the idea investor. You might be chipping away at the relationship investor, and they're a great source of money. On the professional side, I look for in venture capital firms, I look for people that have made a lot of kind of close investments in the space. So for like my company DevOps, it was a hot market wave. So literally everybody was either trying to invest or they had one or two investments. They won't typically invest in something that's competitive, but they will invest in something that is complementary to the space, because they're all bought in on the space, is my experience.
And did you sequence who you pitched in the process in a certain way?
Absolutely. I always start with, so the broader arc is I'll go around, like with VictorOps, I went and talked to probably 30 CEOs of SaaS businesses, because I knew my customer was going to be a SaaS business. So I'd start with the CEO, which I could generally get into, or the VP of engineering, and I would do the things I said, which is validate that they think it's a problem. If they don't, stop there. Just thank them for the time, buy them lunch, and leave. If they do validate it's a problem, then you kind of soft pitch to them in the initial discovery session about how you think the solution might be. And I wouldn't even go into a ton of detail. Like, don't give them the chance to say no until you have a better fleshed out idea of how the solution will work. And then when you get, once you get it, so now fast forward to the point where you have this deck, go pitch them first. They're not investors, so some of the subtleties might be lost on them, and they won't digest the business bits or the investment profile very well, but they can at least validate that you've got the problem and the story right. And then go to investors that you're pretty damn sure aren't going to invest and pitch them, because you're not going to blow the deal anyway. And you got to pitch like 20 times, in my opinion, before you stop hearing new questions. So start with the ones that aren't going to invest. It doesn't match the space they've ever been in. You hear bad things about them, whatever, just start with them. And then when, they ask 4 good questions, that they will, because even bad ones are pretty smart. Those will be before you've heard the answer. You've gotten the question and be able to build the answer before you go to the prime ones. So that's what I do. It's not what you want to do, because you're like, this is uncomfortable, it's painful, it stresses me out, and I don't want to do it. Start with the ones that aren't going to invest.
Awesome. Some questions from the chat here. On the pitch deck question, curious the difference between slide 2 and slide 5.
Let me see here. Hang on. I gotta go back.
Is it right that 1 and 2 is the high level problem plus the market, and 4 and 5 is a more specific problem and market? So maybe digging into the difference between slides 2 and 5.
Yeah. I think he was talking about the one where it lists all this one. This one right here.
Yep.
Yeah. They're subtly different. It's if the problem really resonated, the pain point really resonates with the person you're pitching, they're going to say, I just feel so visceral that this is actually a pain point that people will pay money for. Why haven't they yet? The better job you do with one, the more number 2 has to say why it hasn't been solved. Because, everybody solved everything. You probably have 6 competitors you don't even know about out there, right? So I think it's really important to answer that market wave question super fast. Like, if you start with the market wave, and I'm speaking broadly, not to exactly the words on the slide, but if you start with the market wave, then you risk having a top-down pitch. And they're like, yeah, I know, great. If I had a pile of gold, everybody'd be happy. But you don't, you got to establish the problem, and then you got to say, why it hasn't been solved. And then you got to answer what it is. I feel super passionate. Number 5, why hasn't this been done before, is kind of a retrograde case of 2 to me. It's like, okay, maybe the pain, I got the pain thing, but maybe the why does it have to be solved right now? Maybe that didn't resonate with me. So 5 is sort of the retrograde case where you're like, okay, I don't complete, this doesn't, and I'm not getting it the first time I'm being pitched, but okay, it's really important, but why hasn't it been done before, right? It's kind of, they are similar. I see with the person that asked the question, but I think 5 is a bit of an insurance policy for 2. That's the way I look at it.
Cool. Another question in the chat here. What's your recommendation about use of funds right now, considering the whole context of the economy and climate has changed in the last 90 days?
Well, I think, I don't know if I can answer this for every case, but what I will say is I think if you're a company that's in product development stage, and the problem resonates and the solution resonates, you're not quite to market yet, that's not a bad place to be in, because I think a savvy investor will know, it's a little bit of an uphill push right now, but and then there's varying opinions how fast that unwinds. But if you're in product development and you're writing code and you're validating, I think that's pretty market immune. It's like, yeah, you got to get the money, but once you have it, then I think preservation of capital and maybe not putting, this whole presentation is about velocity business. So I'm always a little apprehensive to say things like this, but maybe make sure the product is fully formed. This is a good time in the market to do that. Whereas you might try to rush a product to market in a hotter market. I hope that makes sense.
Yep. What's your recommendation for companies who have traction? So let's say, like, we have a few companies in this class who haven't raised money, but actually have a real business that's humming. Do you pull that earlier in the pitch because you have numbers to show, or where does that end up going in the pitch? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think it's good to pull it earlier in the pitch if the numbers are really impressive. I mean, there can be this sort of entrepreneurial rose-colored glasses where you're like, man, I am killing it with $14,000 of ARR. And you're like, okay, I know it feels like a lot because you got every dollar yourself, but just be careful because it's actually a really strong close too. And if you can't establish the pain and the solution and the team, then it's like, then it kind of flies by as that 14,000 of MRR, and you go, okay, I got to go back and look at this stuff now anyway. So, I wouldn't lead with numbers that really aren't that amazing, and it's easy to do for a young new entrepreneur.
Great.
And absolute dollars to me, I actually have 0 as a personal angel investor. Absolute dollars, it's just like I just brush it aside. I want to know what the growth rate is. I mean, a pretty early stage company should be in like the 300%, kind of growth range. If you're putting up a solid, 80%, month over month, it's like, okay, that's sort of what you ought to be doing. It's the price of entry to me. Once you start that revenue engine, you sort of have to have those numbers. But there is an advantage to not leading with the revenue engine because you want them to grab a hold of the problem at this really early stage. You want them to be believers in the problem, the solution, and the team. Don't get them enamored. And you can attract the wrong investors too, is my personal opinion. Natty might not feel this way, having his hand in, his foot in both worlds of investing and TechStaring, but But if your investor gets so enamored with the revenue engine so fast, but they don't really understand what they're investing in, that's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. Tell us more about your thoughts around, okay, so you've put together a deck, you've built an investor pipeline, now you actually have a meeting with an investor. What advice do you have around running the meeting itself? Like, who goes to the meeting?
So
Agenda?
this is probably a whole nother presentation, but you have, so just mechanically, I would hone these slides so well that you could give them in any order, because some investors will just grab a hold of the reins on this thing, and you'll get one slide in and they'll want to talk about slide 11. And if that flusters you and you can't do that, you have to go pitch more to people, that do that. You have to somehow be able to weave a story, even if they take you off into the weeds. So to me, that's a really important thing. My partner at Legit, we used to call these pitchlets, because it's really good if you can have two people that pitch, and maybe it's just the way my brain works, but we would roll into investor meetings. Conservatively, I've done 500 investor meetings, in my career. So you roll into some of these meetings and then they take you astray. And the more you pitch and the more you do this, you end up with these pitchlets, which are these little tiny stories, right? The little story about revenue, the little story about why you made the product, the little story. And you can start to assemble these in any order that an investor wants. And it's not bad that they engage and take control. It means they're engaged. They're trying to answer the 5 questions that will disqualify you as fast as possible and get you the hell out of the door. So you need to be able to figure out how to assemble that and still make it a story and get back to your surfboard wave and dude story, and so I guess that's sort of my advice there. There's probably a much wider answer to that if I really thought about it, but.
Yeah, one thing I've worked with companies on is figuring out, like, what are your 3, we call them must errors, which are like the 3 things you feel like you have to get across really well in the story. And remember, like, even if you end up getting steered in different directions, it's okay, but come back and remind yourself, have I gotten those 3 points across that I want to make sure I get across? And then it's your job to weave your way back. Thanks, guys. Weave your way back to those points in an elegant way, because you don't want to leave that meeting and say, like, oh man, like, I never told them the things that I think are most important, because, I kind of let them run the meeting so much. So there's like a dance there that ends up happening. But if you aren't really clear about, like, these are the 3 things I have to make sure I get across, or I'm not going to have left this meeting in good shape.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's another reason I think to pitch people who aren't going to invest first, but can evaluate a pitch pretty well, is because if you get thrown in those, or if you start with the really good, your juicy investor, and they slightly take you askew, and then you forget to mention something, like, that's happened to me a lot, especially at the beginning, when you're kind of, the holes in your presentation, but you're hoping they just won't ask them. And then one of them does, and you're like, and then you end up leaving the meeting exactly like you said, not saying the really awesome thing that was about your company. You ended up talking about the crappy thing that they found.
Right. What is your advice around, tough questions that maybe you don't have a great answer to, or maybe you don't have a great answer because you haven't figured it out yet, or you don't have an answer at all? Like, how do you advise companies to handle that situation?
I guess, I look at it personally as there's a couple kinds of questions I don't have the answer for. So there's a question that I should know the answer for that I don't. And it just revealed itself during this meeting. And I'll typically acknowledge it that way. And if you've done the job, if you've done it the right way, and you've started with the investors that aren't going to invest, it doesn't make any difference anyway, right? So it's kind of good that you were there. But I would just say, you know what, I don't know that. I haven't thought of the problem that way, but that's excellent feedback. Let me take that away. If it's one that it's a valid question, but it's not pertinent to your business, I would point out that, I don't have a direct answer for that, but here's why I don't think it's pertinent to my business. This is the way I think of things. And I coach entrepreneurs on this for later on for board meetings where they have board meetings. It's almost as important to demonstrate how you think of the problem as what your answer is, right? Like I said before somebody writes a check to you, you're going to talk to them 10 times. And then once they're on your board, you're going to see them all the time. So it's one of those things where it's more interesting for them to know how you think about the problem, right? Or how you come to a solution. Well, I thought, here's the situation, A, B, and C. Like we could do A, it's this, but I don't like that because of this. B, we could do that, but I don't like it because of this. And there's C, which I'm picking because the other two didn't really, seem like the answer to the problem. So I like those kind of things. It's kind of an advanced skill set, I would say, but I like to be able to do that because it makes them say, okay, I understand why he didn't know the answer to this question now, because he didn't prioritize it because of this thought process. So now I'm going to tell him this thought process. And if the entrepreneur is smart, he'll go, you know what? I hadn't thought of it that way, but let me take that away and get back to you, with a better answer on that. I think that's completely valid. You're trying to get rid of as much of those things as you can in these early stages, but it's going to happen to you.
How do you know that a meeting with an investor was successful or not?
I don't know, because I found the beta is like completely out of whack with how I feel when I leave the meeting. The best meetings I had were the ones where I felt like it went for shit, to be honest. In retrospect, it's not surprising why. They dug in. They ask a lot of questions. If they're not interested in you, they're just going to sit there and let you do the presentation. Go, well, let's get back to you. And you're going to go, man, I nailed it. I just freaking flew through that thing. But all it means is they weren't interested. If they ask you a ton of hard questions and you leave there feeling bad because they caught you up in something, but you handled it okay, that's actually not a bad indication. Care is hard to fake,
Yeah. What do you, maybe piggybacking on that, one of the things I've advised companies to do, and I'm curious your take on this, is it's tough to leave a meeting with no clear next step. And so I almost usually like companies to, and again, this takes some practice, but your goal is to actually have them ask a question that you don't know the answer to, so you have something to follow up with that moves the process forward. Like, it's really hard when it's like, okay, well, we'll get back to you. And then you're kind of like, well, I don't have anything I can do right now to keep impressing this investor or move the ball forward. I'm just waiting for them. So it can be really helpful to tee up, like have a goal to tee up a next step in that meeting. That could be, through a question that you didn't know the answer to. It's a follow-up document. It's a, hey, could I connect you with a customer of ours? Like, what do you think about that strategy?
I always love the, can I connect you with a customer of ours? Because if they don't take you up on that, then the problem didn't resonate with them, or the solution or something else didn't, right? Why wouldn't you take that meeting if you were really, they might go, let's save that, but I want an answer to a few more things before they do that. Because it is kind of a pain to get on it. You got to get smarter about the space, then you got to call and have a call, and you don't want to feel dumb. But I do like false urgency. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's you sort of have to create urgency in this process. What I do, I think it's a good idea, but I would typically, at the end, after some questions have been asked or whatever, I would say, if you don't invest in this, why won't you? Because they typically have their own little set of rules. I mean, I do. I have a whole set of rules for my angel investing. And, somewhere in the pitch, I heard something that violated one of my rules. Now I have like 8 rules, so I don't have to have them all be positive, but there's a couple in there that are pretty, pretty important rules. So I think that's a really good indication. If they can come up with a solid thing that you're like, wow, you know, like I looked at a business a couple weeks ago that was both the ownership, the founder represented it as both SaaS and deliverable software, and which to me was a huge warning sign. And I'm like, so tell me about the SaaS part of this. And he goes, well, it's a SaaS business, but here's the problems with it being a SaaS business. If it's deliverable software, then all those problems go away, technical founder. And it's just awesome. And I go, yeah, but the company, first of all, you can't do two. Like, you're 4 people, man. It's like you're running 2 companies there. And 2, why don't you like SaaS? Because the multiples are, you know, extraordinary compared to shipping software to somebody. And then he proceeded to argue with me about it for an hour. So it's like, okay, you know, it's just, make sure whatever you say is like really what you believe. He just shifted into this mode where he was just, you know, anything I ask, it could do. The thing could, you know, launch a thing to the moon by the time we were done with the conversation. Sorry, I got on a rant there.
It's good. I have a question from the chat here, which is, what's your advice for angel investors who scheduled time to meet, but have postponed meetings while they take care of things during COVID? Should we wait a few weeks to check in? Like, what's the appropriate process to engage with them?
I wouldn't, you know, again, I think it's an urgency thing. Go, hey, I'm working through my list of people here. You know, I get it. If it's not your top priority right now, I'll loop back with you and not, you know, at the end of this process or something. But I, you know, I don't know. It doesn't take that long to get a pitch, you know, to me. I'm suspicious how involved they are with the COVID thing, I guess is what I'm saying. When mostly what you do is sit around your home and watch Netflix. So.
Yep. What's your, this is my last question. And then actually good. We have another one from the chat here. What are your thoughts about SaaS enabled marketplace business model for early stage companies?
Well, that was kind of what I had. And the only caution I would give is, like I said, they can be really huge, super valuable businesses, but typically the problem is you have to have, one side of the, you know, it's hard to get supply and demand to build simultaneously because, you know, it's like if you went to eBay, but there was only 4 things for sale. Okay. I don't want any knitting needles today, so I guess I'm out of here. So, you know, eBay and things like that, which are huge marketplace businesses, you know, you typically have to end up with a whole bunch of supply so that when you do generate the demand side, they go there and find something they want. And that's hard to do. Like with my business, which was in the ad tech space, we had to deliver a piece of technology, you know, via SaaS offering that was to publishers, you know, bloggers and professional publishers and everything, that just gave them free, like a shit ton of free information about their audience. And we had to build 100,000 publishers on our platform before we ever generated $1 of revenue. I mean, I was $25 million into raising money at this company and hadn't have $1 of revenue because I needed all of this inventory for somebody to come buy ads on. And, you know, maybe there's ones that scale, you know, linearly on both sides, but it's really hard. It's like, I would personally not do a business like that again, but I think, you know, they're obviously possible. I mean, I'd look into how Uber did it and how, you know, those kind of companies, because they obviously successfully did it. I think one thing is universally true. They take a lot of money. I've never seen a marketplace business that didn't require a ton of funding.
Awesome. All right, last question for me, Todd. Making the ask with investors or to investors, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who maybe haven't done that before or feel some fear around it? Like, what does the ask actually look like in your opinion?
To me, you know, I mean, generally people represent it as an opportunity, you know, it's like, we're doing this, we're trying to raise this much money, we have this much circled which means, you know, a light commit on it. I would love to have you involved in this because of X, and X shouldn't be just because you have money. It should be, you've had 3 SaaS businesses before, and this is a SaaS offering. You've been in the DevOps space, and you know DevOps, you know, something. And on the other side of it, that's my criteria too. If I can't help the company as an angel investor, I won't just generally write a check. I mean, to me, that's how I lower my risk, is I have to know the space, or I have to be able to aid in raising money, or there has to be some leverage for me to lower my risk. The entrepreneur will look at that as I'm helping them, which I am, but it's more a function of lowering my own personal risk. So I think your ask is you're presenting them an opportunity. This is a really good idea. This is a severe pain point. Somebody's going to buy this thing, and you are helpful to me because of X, and I want to have you involved. I think, to me, that's the thing. I mean, I actually walk away kind of bummed when I can help a company and they don't pitch it to me that way, right? They're just like, oh, okay, that dude can write a $25,000 check, so I'll take his money. You know, not interesting.
Cool. All right, we'll wrap it up here. No more questions in the chat. Todd, thank you so much for this. We've had a few requests for the slides, so if you're okay sending them over, maybe you already have, we'll send them around to the group. This has been great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'll send. I edited them a little last night because I hadn't given this in about a year. So I read, after you read a presentation you haven't given in a year, you're like, wow, I left all kinds of words out. So I'll send it back.
Well, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us, spending time with the class this morning, and we'll hopefully see you in person sometime soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Natty. So it was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Appreciate it.